I want to tell you about a new podcast called Amuse News. Publishing multiple days a week, Amuse News is your source for food news, interviews from around the food world, and more. On the show, we'll be engaging with food storytellers, from chefs to advocates to people working in the field, and many more. Find Amuse News wherever you get your podcasts. Amuse News is a destination for everyone who's looking for a new, insightful look into the world of food.
My name is Sarah Kim, and I'm from Austin, Texas. I'm a Cheeselandian because while life is great, cheese makes it better. Go to cheeselandia.com to learn more, and if it's for you, sign up.
I'm your host, Eli Sussman, and this is The Line on Heritage Radio Network. At first, 2020 was the year of the restaurant pivot. Unfortunately, we're now at a stage where 2020 is the year of the restaurant closing. But I offer you that 2020 has been the year of constant reinvention. Chefs are accustomed to retooling the menu on the fly because of an undelivered item or an inaccurately prepped bit of mise en place. But night after night, week after week since the start of the pandemic, chefs, owners, and staff have reorganized seats, tables, menus, and service styles in an attempt to stay open and stay alive to see another week of operation. This year has layered unnatural levels of complexity and financial burden onto a business model already hampered by both. And in this episode of The Line, I speak with two owners that have opened, operated, and constantly retooled, all while operating in the thick of it in Manhattan throughout this pandemic. I was able to chat with co-owner Patricia Howard and her partner and executive chef Ed Sherminsky about the various versions of their restaurant project called Dame. It has existed as a fish and chips pop-up and has also hosted multiple other chefs during what they called their Sunday series. Patricia and Ed donated nearly $20,000 in profit. Yes, $20,000 in profit to NAACP, Harlem Grow, Hot Bread Kitchen, and Soulfire Farm this summer from their various cooking efforts. They are currently opened as Dame Deli and Bottle Shop, serving Ed's seafood conservas, condiments, and soups, along with some of their favorite wines, fresh produce, and prepared goods for many of their friends who dropped in for pop-ups this summer. On this special episode, we talk about trying to open and stay open during COVID, how a small team and a lack of funding can help you be nimble and scrappy, what it means to have a strong partnership, and if COVID changed any of their ideas about opening and operating a restaurant. Now, on to the episode. Patricia and Ed, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with me. I want to start by asking how things are going with your business right now. So we are in the midst of what some people are calling the second surge in New York City. There's been some more restrictions on businesses, and if I'm not mistaken, you have taken sort of a pause in between your pop-ups and in between what might be the newest incarnation of Dame. So if you could first let me know where you are right now, and then how are things going for you right now in November?
We're currently sitting in 85 McDougal Street, which is the site of our pop-up since June. And we had plans to open it as private dining for the winter. We closed down the summer series because it was getting cold out. We didn't want to invest in heaters and build a fancy structure at this point. So we thought maybe we could do one party a night, 6 to 10 people, our friends. They could rent it out, and Ed would cook a 3 to 5 course meal for them. But in early November, when we were trying to get that going, it seemed like the worst time to bring people inside of our space with the rising COVID cases. So we thought indoor dining was going to be shut down soon, and we nixed that plan. Our current iteration is to become we're calling it Dame Deli and Bottle Shop for the winter. So we're getting it set up right now. We'll open up soft launch tomorrow and a more official launch next week, but just selling produce, wines, bread, all our favorite things that we plan to get through the winter with, and we want to share with the neighborhood. It just seemed like the safest bet for just regarding COVID cases and giving us something to do while we do our build out, but doesn't take as much effort and energy as running a service every night.
One of the reasons that I wanted to speak with both of you is because it's been so interesting to follow all the versions of Dame that have occurred since you took over the space. You've been incredibly nimble in a way that's been really representative of the times. A lot of people, they figure out what their concept is. It takes them a long time to develop it, and they open up with that concept. Maybe COVID has changed people's perspectives on that somewhat, but can you talk about what originally the conceptualization of Dame was going to be and what it became, and then post-COVID, has it changed your ideas at all about what Dame will become?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting, and it's been through a lot of iterations, more than the public's even seen. So we put together. I'll go through this quite quickly because there's quite a lot. We put together the idea for Dame last summer, so summer of 2019, and it was originally going to be a wood-fired grill English restaurant in Manhattan, 25 max capacity indoors, sort of pretty refined cooking, all hearth style, like hearth is in a big fire pit, not the restaurant, where everyone sits around a counter and they just watch, the chefs cooking and they eat. So like Momofuku Ko kind of, without the, probably not quite as ambitious as that, but wood-fired grill. And then we started looking at spaces and raising money for this and realized very quickly that opening a wood-fired grill in Manhattan is not possible unless you have multi-million, way more money than we would ever be able to raise. And that's why you only sort of see it with the huge restaurants or the very powerful ones. So that idea got shelved. And then we sort of thought about what we could do, because we started raising money and had a hard time of it. This was pre-COVID. This was last, fall. A lot of investors who, were regulars at restaurants we cooked at and worked at were just sort of, well, I don't know, like restaurants are risky business. Like they were very right. And so we had a hard time raising money until sort of the new year. And we thought the only way we can really impress people is to get in front of them and show them what we're doing. And the best way to do that is to host a pop-up. And so we looked for spaces that were small enough that we could cook in with just me cooking and just Patricia serving. So 2 members of staff. So it has to be a very small space. Otherwise it feels cavernous. And we opened that at the very start of March and got 6 days of service in before the shutdown. And that's when we started feeling pretty bummed out about the whole thing, because we had by that point spent 9 months working on raising money and getting our names out there, and no one had really heard of us, and we hadn't raised any money. And we were basically in the same place we were a year ago. Add on to that, now there's a global pandemic, and it felt pretty grim. And we spent, as everyone did in March and April, 8 weeks just staying at home as we were told to do and cooking at home. And as May started approaching and it seemed like there might be something to do that summer, or the summer just passed, with outdoor dining, we looked into things like food trucks and, any sort of like food carts, even very affordable ways of cooking and just getting our name out there. And then it seemed like the idea of opening a permanent restaurant was years in the future. And we found the space at 85 McDougal that we're in at the moment, because we've been speaking to the owner of the space here, and she let us use it as a pop-up space, so that we could do, what basically is a food truck thing, fish and chips. And that was the idea. It was going to be one dish, just fish and chips, and it was a world away from the wood-fired grill restaurant with Michelin ambitions that we had originally planned on opening. But the fish and chips took off. People liked it. So we added more food and more people came. And then we added more drinks and more people came for that too. And it sort of turned into more of a restaurant than we were planning on it being. And then one day a friend of mine who was also sort of looking to get his restaurant project off the ground but hadn't been able to because of COVID, he was looking for a place to cook. And I said, well, why don't you come here and cook one day? This was maybe early June. And then his his event, he did Sunday. His name's Alex Pinheiro, and he's opening his restaurant in Jersey later this year called Bodegon. And it was a huge success. It was sort of big sellout, people queuing down the block to take their food to go and eat in the park, that kind of thing. So like, well, why don't we do one next Sunday? And then basically every Sunday it just kept getting bigger and bigger, and we kept inviting people back. And I think after like the second or third week, we decided, well, now we just got to do something every Sunday because this is great. It's also a day off for us. We don't have to work.
Perfect.
And then, so that sort of ethos of collaboration carried Dame through to October. And, you know, this is sort of, we haven't really announced anything yet, but we're in the process of taking over a space very nearby to build out the permanent restaurant. And because we, you know, been able to show some sort of success this summer in a very hard time to operate a restaurant, we were able to convince a few investors to, you know, put their confidence or put their faith in us. And, you know, maybe what we've been trying to do last year, we were able to do this sort of summer and fall, just in spite of the circumstances. To answer your question about how Dame's changed, like now we're a seafood restaurant. That was not the plan originally, but it was such a success this summer that it seems silly to deviate.
How did you look at the beginning for investors? And the reason partly that I'm asking is because I think in 2021, there's going to be a lot of people that were working at other restaurants that are going to make the decision to pull the trigger on doing their own projects. And it's really interesting to hear about the successes and failures of fundraising and how at the beginning you were not able to, but now it seems like you were able to turn the corner and actually acquire some investors. So can one of you speak a little bit about the beginning when it wasn't successful and now when you've been able to convince people to give you some money?
Yes. In the beginning, it was over a year ago, so summer 2019, we started putting pen to paper and, you know, committed to making this a reality. So we started with a business plan and did everything from Google, like how to write a business plan, to talking to other people we knew that had, you know, started businesses and restaurants, just picked everyone's brains that we could and put together a like 20-page document. I happen to have a degree in writing from Columbia, and Ed has an economics degree from the London School of Economics. So, okay,
not a bad power couple to put a business plan together.
Yeah, we had the math and the words covered. So, but it did take a long time and a lot of days of like meeting after work in coffee shops and whenever we were both off, and that laid out like our dream restaurant that we had in our head. But when it comes to convincing other people to give you money to make that a reality, that's where we saw some of the problems. Like a lot of people wanted us to have a space first and, you know, like, okay, you have a rent number in your budget, but what if you can't find a space with that rent? Or, yes, you want the West Village clientele, but what if you get a restaurant in Bushwick? Like, there's a lot of odds and ends that people weren't comfortable signing away their money until we had locked down. And we had investor dinners booked at our first pop-up that got canceled because of COVID. So we got really excited that we had, you know, a group of 10 people from the Hamptons coming to eat at our restaurant, but that was scheduled for March 16th or 17th or something. So that got canceled. And there was a lot of like pitching everyone we knew that had money, everyone we knew who had opened a restaurant, or so we sent a lot of people our business plan and got a lot of like, wow, this is really awesome. We can tell you've spent a lot of time on this. Keep me posted.
Yeah. It's always extremely tough to crack that first person. Right. And then it does make it easier to go to the second person and say, well, we do have someone on board. Yeah. But finding that first person is always extremely challenging. So you face kind of this demoralizing moment in March that people that already had restaurants were kind of they were worrying about, oh, well, we might be closed for 2 weeks, a month, but you were really right at the cusp of trying to get everything organized. So when March happened, was there a discussion between you two about potentially putting the project on pause and going to find other jobs in the meantime? Or did you think that it was going to be a fairly short hiccup in the process and you would still continue pursuing the upscale Michelin driven Dame concept?
I think it's a question of alternatives. Like if we could have put the project on hold to go take $100,000 a year head chef job somewhere else and ride it out for a year, that would have been ideal. But I think it was quite clear to any astute observer by the middle of March that the next, basically until a vaccine was issued, it was going to be a very bad time to be working in restaurants. And so we could either go and try and scrounge out some line cook jobs or server jobs, or focus on pivoting this project to something that maybe we weren't necessarily enthusiastic about. Because I've said this publicly before. It's not my dream to cook fish and chips. When we do them, we do them well. But it's you don't spend 10 years of your life training to put things in a deep fryer. But it was either that or be faced with a very tough jobs market. And I think a lot of news outlets have done a good job of covering the difficulties that face cooks and chefs, in a environment where there's very little government aid for the cooks or for the businesses, and everyone's looking out for themselves, and it's the people at the bottom who get screwed. And that's also partly why we wanted to pivot to this, because what if we had a chance to employ some people who wouldn't otherwise have jobs by doing fast casual, if that's what you would call the fish and chips kind of concept, which is what ended up happening. And that's something we're proud of.
Did you have to invest money to get the fish and chips concept off the ground? Was there equipment or marketing expenses that you incurred in order to get that going, or was it very DIY in the sense of, okay, we're going to buy product and a week from now we're going to start selling fish and chips and see how it goes?
We are extremely DIY, and people call it like bootstrapping. I think that's one of the reasons we've been so successful, and we're able to do that because we're a 2 to 3 person team. Like, we're very nimble and can kind of play it by ear. So yes, we didn't have to invest much money. We had to buy 2 electric deep fryers on Webstaurant.com. We bought, the paper boats that we serve the fish and chips in. And then we printed some foam board signs that we attached to the windows of our little shop and take those down every night. So that was like $100 from a graphic, like screen printing place in the basement of my building, in my apartment building. We bought like AstroTurf from Home Depot to make a little outdoor seating. We had a guy on Facebook Marketplace build us planters that the city required you have. We went to the dollar store and got fake flowers. So we did everything as cheap as we could because we had no investors for this current iteration.
Yeah, I will say that's I think if we have one contribution to make to the New York culinary canon about how to do pop-ups, a bunch of people do pop-ups, but I think the thing, I said this to another people who held a Sunday series at Dame, and they've since gone on to open their first restaurant. I think taking some of this advice is this is it. Find a space that has a liquor license so you can sell booze, because you can't make enough money just selling food. And find it that has some sort of infrastructure already in place, preferably it has gas, or you just buy cheap electric equipment and put it in. And focus on 1 or 2 things that you do really, really well, and just make them really delicious. And then invite all your friends. And Florence Fabricant's email is public information, and so the Eater People's emails. Just email them. Don't pay $500,000 for a fancy PR company, and you make it look nice. It doesn't have to be nice. The food has to be phenomenal.
Perfect.
You can't get away with shitty food or shitty service, but you really can get away with putting up a paper foam board, because it's a friend of ours said this to us, and it's very true. This is all just a set design. We're building a restaurant as a set, and it comes down eventually. And if you're only hosting a 6-month pop-up, find it cheap. And that's why we didn't have to spend a lot of money, because some people do these pop-ups and spend $10,000 on getting it up and running. And that's really, I mean, we couldn't even afford to be in a $10,000 hole. Like that wasn't even a conversation starter.
And truly, at the end of the day, it really is about the food. You can have as much window dressing as you want, but if you make really good tacos or fish and chips, people will come and they will line up and they'll be satisfied at paying a lower price point than if you needed to cover your $900,000 build out or whatever it might be. And so it's exciting probably for people to have been involved with the pop-up and seen, and I mean this as a positive thing, what you did with so little. You know, it seems like you really decided to spend as little amount of money as possible and just get it open. I'm curious, Ed, though, from just a chef and culinary standpoint, you've said that it was not your dream to cook fish and chips and that you had Michelin aspirations when the original business plan was being put together. Have you been able to find certain levels of culinary satisfaction with the current incarnation of Dame, or are you kind of just still biding your time and planning dishes for what you consider to be like the true version that will open one day?
Definitely a bit of both. I have come to love the fish and chips, and we apply quite a lot of technique to it that makes it probably more complicated than it need be in the kitchen, but it just translates to something super delicious for the customer. So, I mean, there's some chefing it up back behind the closed doors, but that was also part of what was so exciting about the initial success Dame had this summer, was that people came for the fish and chips, and then they came back the next week and saying, "I have the fish and chips, and what else do you have?" So then we started playing around with other dishes, this kind of thing that would be on the Dame, the real Dame's menu, but putting them in paper boats and not doing table service and still charging, way less than you would get in a tablecloth restaurant. That's been kind of fun to mess around with, because we can do scallop crudo for $10 or $12 instead of the $22 it would cost when, you have to pay all the overheads and the huge staff kind of thing. So, I think any decent cook or chef will find a way to, with whatever they're working with, they'll find a way to make it enjoyable for themselves, and that's sort of how we did it.
One of the great things about doing a pop-up is that the folks that are doing the pop-up are so passionate about it. They do a lot of the marketing and social media heavy lifting. If you just have a restaurant and you say, this weekend we're doing barbecue, and next weekend we're doing Vietnamese spring rolls, it's not really as exciting as someone else coming in and doing barbecue. And also they kind of, they're so excited about bringing their own followers and friends in that you get a new clientele every single week. How were you able to consolidate those fans weekly and get them to return? Did you try to capture people's emails while they were sitting? Did you ask them to follow you on Instagram? Like, how did you turn a follower of a different restaurant or a different pop-up into followers of your concept and convert them into someone who would return next week?
We earned a lot of repeat customers just by showing them a good time, and by having, every Sunday was like a community event. People in the industry knew they could come on Sundays to Dame and see people they knew and have rotating like fun cocktails and a whole new menu every Sunday. And it kind of grew into its own thing. Like, it wasn't just Yellow Rose's pop-up, it was Yellow Rose at Dame. And people did like special menu items just at their Dame pop-up. They had, it became more than just the pop-ups they were doing elsewhere. It was a whole part of, like, we had the charity aspect.
I don't think we were specifically looking to take their audience base, which sort of helped. I think we just, as P said, we're just putting on a fun show, really, a Dame every Sunday. And they're like, oh, well, this was fun. Let's, if people enjoy themselves, they come back, right? This was the summer of no rules too. So
totally,
if people enjoyed the arepas, they would come next week for the brisket, or in the middle of the week for the fish and chips. And it helps run a busy street in the West Village. And, a lot of people just walk past Dame and say, oh, there it is. Like, this is the place I've heard about. Let's go. Now there are people standing outside right now looking for fish and chips.
Was the idea that, Ed, you would be in the kitchen and Patricia, you would be operations and or front of house, or is it everyone doing a little bit of everything? I assume right now everyone's doing a little bit of everything, but when you were planning the sort of more traditional brick and mortar restaurant dine-in experience, was that the delineation of labor, or is it a different way?
That's true. Ed is definitely the chef. I try to avoid the kitchen. But then this summer we really exploded on McDougall Street and became more of a bar than we thought we would be. And the service aspect became a lot more demanding. Like on a Saturday night after the kitchen had kind of closed, Ed would come up and help me bartend or help, take orders. There were a few months there where we were just slammed at night. So that was really helpful. And Ed does a lot of the wine. We collaborate on cocktails. I think most everything besides the kitchen is a collaboration.
And even that is too. Like the partnership we have works so well because we, really trust and value each other's feedback and opinion on things. So that it enables us to. I'm sure you've been part of restaurants where just everyone's arguing all the time and the chef's yelling and the people in the office are cowering in fear, and it's just it's just an unhealthy, catastrophic work environment. And we just, we've seen that before and try and have the opposite of that kind of attitude. So there's no sort of firm line in the sand. But that being said, we do each have our areas of expertise, and people do not want me to be touching all the tables and serving them. I guarantee the accent rubs off with some brusqueness.
I am wondering, I know that people are often very cagey about finances and the financials, but if you would speak a little bit to, has this been successful? Is this just like we're scraping by and we are just waiting until there's a vaccine? Or have you actually been able to use this time to raise any money that is then going to go into your projects and I hope helping you live to a certain extent during this this COVID lockdown?
Well, we took I didn't say this earlier, actually. We opened the restaurant in the middle of the social justice protests and the sort of start of right in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. And we were out protesting every day, as I think, a lot of people were. And it seemed very irresponsible then to open a brand new restaurant, because we heard all these people, all these restaurateurs are struggling to get by. And, everyone's focused on social justice. So what business do we have opening a restaurant? However, we thought, because we have this skill set, we know how to cook, we know how to serve and pour wine and make cocktails, we could use it as a way of making money and donating that money to the Black Lives Matter movement and various organizations affiliated with it. And so that's what we did. We pledged at the start of the summer that for the pop-up, we were going to donate all of our profits to charity, which sort of got a laugh from people because they're like, oh, really? All of it? And then, they sort of realized we were a tiny restaurant and it wasn't going to be that much, or so they thought. To answer you, so that gives us a very clear idea of how much money we made, because every week we sort of counted what we spent and how much we made. We paid ourselves, an industry standard salary. We paid our employee, and then the rest we donated. And over the 4 months that we were operating, it was $20,000, a little over $20,000. And then there's some that's set aside for the non-tax deductible stuff. So our total profit on revenue of roughly $200,000 was $25,000, which is just over a 10% profit margin. It's not, amazing, but it's not terrible. That I think most people consider that a successful restaurant.
I would respectfully disagree with you and say that is amazing. That that during COVID you made A, any profit, and B, that you decided to give any of it or all of it away. I think it's incredibly admirable, and I think it showcases maybe an exciting, not a full shift, but a potential shift of people being interested in business as part of community, and what you spoke to earlier, which is that people coming into the restaurant and having really great camaraderie. It doesn't have to be about throwing plates and white tablecloths and just making money. It can be about many, many more things than that. I think that that's something to be really proud of, and I think that you guys should, brag about that. and
it's great because these organizations have then used the money to, help people's lives. You're right. It's the restaurant communities should extend beyond the four walls of the restaurant, or I guess now it's the four walls and the street too.
We're going to take a quick break for some commercial messages. Stick with us.
My name is Sarah Kim, and I'm from Austin, Texas. I'm a Cheeselandian because while life is great, cheese makes it better. Wisconsin cheese has proven time and time again to be a delicious expression of craft, hard work, and tradition. As a Cheeselandian, I am able to share a Gouda experience with fellow cheese and food lovers nationwide, as well as connect with cheese producers and cheesemongers, taking my love of cheese to another level. I invite you to join Cheeselandia because during these difficult times, it has been even more important to take it easy and get cheesy. The Cheeselandia community and events have been the glue helping to keep us together and connected, and I would love it if you would join me. And let's face it, if you hear the word cheese and get a little hungry, then you've found a place you can call home. To find out more about Cheeselandia, go to cheeselandia.com.
This episode is supported by Nourish and Flourish. Nourish and Flourish features behind-the-scenes stories about artisans, producers, farmers, growers, and other makers in America, along with delicious and wholesome recipes. The latest issue of Nourish and Flourish is a special artisanal gift guide showcasing some of America's finest products, including everything from the farm and garden to eco-friendly home goods, kitchen and cooking essentials, bath and body, original art, blown glass, seasonal recipes, and so much more. Shop online to support local and buy local. Together, we can make a difference. Learn more at nourishandflourish.site.
Welcome back to The Line. I'm your host, Eli Sussman. On today's episode, owner Patricia Howard and partner Chef Ed Sherminsky join me for a chat about their ever-evolving restaurant, pop-up, deli, and bottle shop called Dame. We're going to pick up the conversation with Ed talking about the start of his cooking career back in England.
That's definitely the hardest I've ever worked. Opening or running a restaurant is nothing compared to doing, working in a high-end restaurant and going to LSE at the same time.
Yeah, that sounds like total madness.
That really sucked.
What in the world made you decide to try to have a full-time culinary job, which is so mentally and physically demanding, and also trying to get a degree at LSE?
So I was the weird kid who at 11 years old was like, I've decided, Dad, I want to be an investment banker. Who decides that at 11? But I did. So I did all the stuff that you do to achieve that goal. You get high grades and you get in study mathematics and economics and go to a good university. And so I by the time I was 19, been doing 8 years of this, dedicating myself to working in the world of finance. And then I did an internship in the world of finance. I was like, God, this sucks. At the same time, simultaneously, I just started cooking at a restaurant called PitQ, which I'll talk a little bit more about after this because it has informed what we do at Dame a lot, even though it was 10 years ago now. I was looking for something, I had always liked food. I'd been into it for, I had a mother who was was a chef earlier in life, and I was raised around a family that valued good food. Although, that and being English are sort of oxymorons, but it was true in my case. And I didn't really consider what working in a restaurant would be like. It wasn't a career that I grew up in a relatively wealthy suburb. Being a chef was not something one did with their life. It wasn't frowned upon. It just wasn't known. The only images of chefs I saw was Gordon Ramsay yelling on TV kind of thing. But I knew I liked eating at restaurants. And when it got from being French restaurants on holiday in France or like mediocre suburban restaurants to when I lived in London, because I was, London School of Economics is right in the center of town. It's on Aldwych. So I was living in a dorm that was, the property value of the building is in the tens of millions. The dorms are pretty shitty, but it's in a great location. And I was eating at all these great restaurants, and I saw these people behind the door, and I was like, I wonder what that's like. And as a college kid, yes, you work a lot, but you also have, weekends free largely. It's like, what if I went there and just got a job and just saw what it was like? This was at the same time that I was doing, the degree and then the internship, and I was disillusioned with the internship. And I thought, I'm not sure if I can really do this the rest of my life. So I went into the kitchen one day of a restaurant I worked at, or a restaurant I liked eating at, and asked if I could have a job. In fact, they posted it on Twitter. This was back when Twitter was a usable platform. And so I went in one day, and they sort of just looked at me and laughed. I was like this 19-year-old kid with a preppy haircut studying economics. They're like, what the hell are you going to do in a basement kitchen? But I'm pretty resilient. So they said, okay, you can come. We're not going to pay you, but you can stand there and watch. And I did. And I just, like, the first day I fell in love with it. And I've never seen so much. I think a lot of chefs have this story too, but there's so much energy and attention to detail, like at the same time as so much like violence. I don't mean that in like a physical violent way. I mean like the heat and the fire and the meat on the cutting board and the meringue whirring in the blender. Like there's just so much sensory overload going on, but at the same time it's there's so much teamwork too. And that was just the polar opposite of the asset management floor I was on. So I was mesmerized by this kitchen. And it was very small. It was 3 people in the kitchen at one time and 25-seat dining room. It was not fine dining. It was very similar to what Dame is now. It was a restaurant that focused on barbecue food, which in England in 2011 was not a thing that anyone did. That was like a new, it was kind of like fish and chips in New York. No one made American barbecue food in England. And they had a little smoker downstairs and this wood-fired grill in the basement, which you could just so never do that in New York. It was so great. And the chefs were working there were not, it was not pit masters. It was all 25, 26-year-old people who had come from fine dining backgrounds and wanted to cook something a little more casual. And they applied the ethos that they'd learned in those places. As every Tom, Dick, and Harry who opens a restaurant in New York these days says, I take the techniques I learned at Noma or 11 Madison Park, wherever they trained, and applied it to my little bistro. And 99% of the time, that's bullshit, honestly. Most chefs who run little bistros serve pretty crappy food. There are, of course, some like very notable exceptions, but the average restaurant in New York does not serve, particularly high quality of food. But this place in London really did. The same is true in London as well. This restaurant really did. PICU served amazing food in a very laid-back environment. And the staff was the staff was the most inspiring part because they were all so focused and so dedicated in a way that in the world of finance, they were not. People were there to, show up and get their, bonus and paycheck and all that stuff. So I just kept coming back until they started paying me. And that took 6 months or so. But because I was in England, there's a lot more support for college students than there is in the US. You get loans from the government that cover your cost of living. So I didn't need a salary at the time, which was very fortunate. And my accommodation was paid for by the university. So I could afford to do that, and I just did, and I just loved it. And the second they offered to pay me, I was like, all right, great, I'm going to drop out of college. And then I got on the phone with my dad, who's an economist, and he said, you're absolutely not dropping out of college. All right, fine. So then I did both at the same time. But once I'd been caught by the cooking bug, it was very quick, and it's, head over heels romance kind of thing. And I've never looked back.
So you did finish school?
I did, yeah.
And how long after you finished school did you decide that you were not going to pursue a banking career or any type of economics related career, and that you would go into cooking full time?
After my first day in the kitchen, honestly, that's truthfully not exaggerating. I never even, I went back to finish the internship, which was 3 months long maybe, but I didn't pursue a job there at all. I was by the end of my first year of college, I decided I had no interest in anything other than cooking. And I'm quite lucky that I still feel that way, because I guess a lot of people make boneheaded decisions in their teens and go on to regret them.
Well, you had a degree in economics to fall back on, so it's not like
I guess that's why I want to.
I feel like you would have been potentially employable. How long until you moved to the United States? Like, how long had you been cooking in England before you decided to come and work for you? Did you immediately go and work for April Bloomfield when you came to the United States?
I did, yeah. So when I graduated, I graduated in 2014. And then in England, it's only a 3-year degree. All degrees are only 3 years. So I was 21 at the time. So I should say this about PICU. Like, it started off as this tiny barbecue place serving pulled pork sandwiches for 10 pounds or something. It now is like the chef has gone on to run his fine dining farm and hotel in the countryside. The sous chef is the head chef at Maimo, the 3 Michelin star restaurant in Oslo. A couple of other sous chefs have their own restaurants in London. Tom Parry passed through that kitchen. He has Brat. Chris Leach does. He has Manteca in London. Like, there were only 6 members of staff, and every single one of them, I'm the last one now to have my own restaurant, and every single one of them now does. And Tom, who was the owner of PICU, when he started doing his countryside thing, got in touch with his old friend April, who Tom and April have known each other for a while, and she's an investor in that project in the English countryside. So she, after all the stuff at Ken Friedman in New York, like, she spent a lot of time with Tom at the farm and stuff, and they sort of built this idyllic country space. But they were friends when I was contemplating moving to the States, and so there wasn't even really a conversation. It was like Tom, and this is sort of how it works in England, and I think it used to work in the States, but maybe not so much. Like, when you work for a chef for a couple of years and you say you're ready to move on, they say, okay, great, this is what you're moving on to. And you sort of don't question it, because they have your best interests at heart, and they're honest, good people, and they're going to put you in touch with honest, good people. So Tom sent me to April in New York, and I spent a year and a half there at the Spotted Pig, and the rest, since then I've stayed.
And so the Spotted Pig is an extremely high volume restaurant. When it was open, it had 3 floors. It was open until incredibly late. It also, I haven't been to PICU, but it is a restaurant that prides itself on having excellent food, but it is in no way fancy. I would not consider it to be a super refined, upscale restaurant, right? It is more of a pub-style restaurant, if that's a fair way to describe it. Yeah. And so when you got there, was it what you expected? And also, what was great about that experience, and what was maybe not so great about it?
So the first thing to note, in England, when you work, and in France too, when you work in a kitchen, you work normally the whole day, which starts there aren't really prep cooks. So you start your job at 8, 9 in the morning, and you finish at midnight. And the restaurant's only open from noon to 10. So there's all these hours on the end that that's all your prep work and your cleaning work. So I got to New York saying, like, well, fuck, the Spotted Pig's open at 11 a.m. and it closes at 2. So my shift's going to be like 6 a.m. to 3 a.m. And I was very relieved to find out that people work in shifts in the US and that you only do sort of 8 to 10 hours at a time. I loved the volume, because the volume was what we did at PICU as well. It's different kind of numbers. Like, PICU was 100 covers a night with 3 people, and the Spotted Pig was 400 covers a night with 8 people, 6 maybe. But I really... I think a lot of chefs enjoy the adrenaline of that. And April is an incredibly talented chef who has, a rare eye for making, simple food delicious. That, again, like, her idol is Fergus Henderson, the chef of St. John, and they have this thing in common where they both take very, very sparse ingredient list and make it more delicious than it should be given what's in it, which is something I try and emulate. And I think a lot of chefs who have left the Spotted Pig and gone on to do their own thing try and emulate to varying degrees of success. And that sort of that combined with the energy of the place leads to this great sense of sort of team camaraderie. And that was, something I enjoyed about the Spotted Pig a lot. The downside is that when you do 400 plates a night, not everything goes out perfect. And you sort of have to, I didn't have to make this decision. I was a line cook and then a junior sous chef. But as a chef, you have to make the decision that, okay, we're going to prioritize volume over, perfection. And I don't say that with any sense of judgment. Like if I was in her shoes, I would probably do the same thing. Like that's what we do at Dame right now. We prioritize volume over perfection. But then, you have to rely on people who are not always you. If you're the chef of then 9 restaurants or however many April had at the time, you have to rely on your sous chefs and, your head chefs and stuff. And they're not always, it depends on the person, but they're not always translating, that standard to, the every line cook always the same. So you get, the bigger a ship is, the harder it is to keep an eye on every crewmate, right? And that was something that's, why I maybe prefer the small, 3-person line to the larger 6-7 person line. But I'm very glad I did it. And I wouldn't know that if I hadn't had that learning experience.
When I look at some of the places that you've worked over time, I'm hearing PICU, which is barbecue, and then you moved to an April Bloomfield restaurant where she is a great lover of not only pig, but also heavy meat dishes. And then you end up at Beatrice Inn, which is a Chef Angie Marr restaurant, and became extremely well known for dry-aged, very large cuts of meat. Before we get into the Beatrice Inn and talking also about Patricia, I just want to ask you, was this intentional that you worked at so many restaurants that are meat-centric, or did it just sort of happen that way?
Honestly, it wasn't. I sort of just went to restaurants that I liked eating at. And with the exception of, the move to the Spotted Pig, which is because Tom sent me there. But then when I lived in New York, I wouldn't have stayed there for as long as I did if I didn't enjoy eating at Spotted Pig too. It's the best advice you can give to any chef, right? Like, or any cook, like work at the places you enjoy the most. And that was the kind of food I like to eat the most. It was, April's pig ear salad with the lemon caper dressing and the bitter greens it's a meat heavy dish, but it's phenomenal. And PICU's meat sourcing was just impeccable. And I just kept chasing this really, really delicious food wherever I could see it.
I want to ask a little bit about first doing events and how that has helped you with Dame, and what are some of the pieces of what you did when you were working for Eric and is it Leslie or Leslie?
Lyle, yeah.
Lyle.
Yeah.
And how that sort of informed a lot of the things that you've been able to do after that.
Yeah, so working for Eric and Lyle is the Metric Group. So they had Gilded Lily and the Monarch Room, the Monarch Room was like crazy, ginormous restaurant, like cavernous restaurant on West 15th Street and like 10th Ave. So very like old New York, fancy, $20 cocktails before that was a thing. And that was my first ever time like not being a customer at a restaurant. So I had never worked, I'd never been a server. I'd never been in a restaurant kitchen before. And I was currently working at a school at that time, and I was just desperate to get out of my situation.
As a teacher? As
a teacher. And I just was not meant to be a teacher. I was trying it out. And a friend of mine had sent me this job offer. Why don't you go work at this restaurant? And I'm very organized and like, implementing systems and stuff. And that's what they were looking for. They didn't have anyone in their like office running their like records and Google Drive and fixing the printer when it, breaks and ordering supplies and stuff. So that was a really good way to get my feet wet in the world of restaurants and learn about the back end of everything. If the chef needed to find a specialty ingredient, I would help him do that. But I would also, help them with PR and events and accounting. So I got exposed to a lot of aspects of running a restaurant. And that's very similar to the same stuff I did at the Beatrice Inn for Angie, even more so on like the brand side and because her PR and image is such a big part of the Beatrice Inn. So I learned all about that. I helped produce her cookbook. And again, that all just solidified like I want to own a restaurant. I want to do all these little aspects.
Well, when you say that you wanted to own a restaurant and you saw all those little aspects, what about all those little tasks was appealing that made you think that I want to be doing this every day?
Similar to what Ed fell in love with in the kitchen, I loved on the other side. I never wanted to be a server, but I liked the world of being in a restaurant and, I loved food. I loved food photography. Like I wanted to travel through eating, like all of that I loved. And I also, when I was little, I wanted to own a shop. I worked in a gift shop all through middle school and high school. So just like creating a space and an experience for someone, I really enjoyed that. Paired with my organization skills and I don't know why I picked restaurants, but it seemed like everything I loved came together in a restaurant.
Partnership is so hard. And one of the craziest aspects of such a crazy business is you have to choose whether or not you're going to do it alone or whether or not you're going to find someone or people to go on this journey with you. And there's tons of books out there and tons of interviews of partners and trying to find this secret sauce. Are there moments when you guys feel like you're totally on totally different pages, or do you feel like for the most part you're aligned when you are thinking about the concept and big decisions and vision and things like that?
We're almost a year and a half into this partnership, and I've never once regretted it or had oh shit, maybe we should not be partners. I've never had those thoughts.
It helps when you can try run it for a few years beforehand too. I don't know what the data is on this, but you're right. A lot of these partnerships are shotgun together between I'm the owner with the money. I know this chef, he's pretty good, and he knows the GM, and he's pretty good, and let's all get together and open a restaurant. I'm like, all right, but you're now spending $1 million on people you've known for at most a couple years. It's very brave. And on the other hand, you have all right, this person's a chef, and they raise the money, but they're going to then go off and hire 75 different people to do different parts of their job for them, and none of them end up doing it the way the chef wants it, and you get a very fractured, just non-warm restaurant, a very unenjoyable experience to eat in and to work in too, because everyone's always yelling at each other because they didn't do what the big chef overlord wanted. I think having a small partnership of people who know each other very well, which if I'm right, you have too, that really helps, because if you weren't on the same page about so much stuff, you wouldn't have made it this far in your relationship. There are, if you have lifelong friends or family who you're very, very close with, those are the people you should open restaurants with, because, you got to tolerate being with them every day forever. So that's the most important thing.
Beyond just finding, a good partnership and people that you can actually be aligned with and agree to spend the next several years of your life together. For someone that's listening to this show, that's thinking about, they've had some time to gather their thoughts during COVID and they're thinking of going out on their own and maybe opening up their own concept. I would love to hear both of you answer this question. What type of advice could you give to someone who's had an idea percolating and thinks, okay, maybe 2021 is my time to take this out to market and start fundraising and start really trying to find a location and get my idea into the brick and mortar stage? What would you tell that person right now?
I mean, two things that I would say, which are sort of tied together. It's like, one, if you've ever even had if you've ever had a doubt in your ability or a doubt in your capacity to do this or whether it's going to work, really, really evaluate whether you want to. I'm not saying don't, just think really hard, because everything that can be thrown at you will. And if there's anything that could happen to you that would make you not want to open a restaurant, then seriously consider not doing it. Because there are, as you said earlier, there are a lot of other jobs in restaurants normally that you could work in instead. And the other point, which is linked to this, is just think hard about how much money it costs and how much money you really need to raise. Because it's all, I don't know about the average chef or the average line cook, but I have next to no savings. And I think most chefs have. I've been an executive chef or head chef of the restaurant for 2 years. I've both 2-star New York Times ones, one of which was my own review. And I had, basically living paycheck to paycheck. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. Unless you're very financially responsible as a cook, you have very little money. So if you're a cook and you have a great idea and you really believe in yourself, just getting the liquor license costs $15,000. Putting the deposit down costs $50,000 to $100,000. Getting your operating agreement set up, before you even have started any of the process, you need a piece of paper that forms your company and your partnership. That costs $3,000. If you have $3,000 to spend on that, and there's just so much money you need to raise to make this happen. Even if it's a tiny little restaurant. So just think really, really hard about whether you want to do that, and it does mean forgoing a lot of things to raise the money to do this. There's no doubt in my mind that it's the best job in the world running a restaurant. It's amazing. But a lot of people would disagree with that. A lot of people would say it sucks. So just, really, really think about whether you want to do that. And if you do, if you answer yes and say oh, fuck it, I don't care what he's saying, I've got to do it, then there's nothing I or anyone else can say that'll be meaningful advice, because you're going to figure out a way to do it. If it really means that much to you, then, we had received advice from 50 to 100 people on how to do this. Some of them James Beard award-winning chefs and restaurateurs, who honestly gave the worst advice, and some of them from just friends who had businesses in entirely different fields. And is it useful in the aggregate? Maybe, but there's the Malcolm Gladwell Blink thing, right? Just go with what you know to be right, because you've lived it and experienced it, and figure out a way to make it work. But if you can be dissuaded, then be dissuaded.
And Patricia?
I think the value of having a partner, we've already touched on this, but I think both of us would say that we wouldn't have gotten this far alone. We had one friend of ours coming to do a pop-up a few months ago, and then we went on opening day of her spot. I'll just say Mel Bakery. Nora Allen's one of our good friends. And opening day of her bakery, she forgot the straws. She was selling iced coffee, but didn't have any straws. So she, we ordered a coffee, and she's like, okay, here's your coffee, but I don't have any straws to go with it. And so we ran and got her some straws from a coffee shop down the street, no problem. But just not having a sounding wall or someone to go over your checklist with and be like, am I forgetting anything? That is infinitely important, I think.
We are getting closer and closer to 2021, which feels like this sort of mental turning the corner, but still we have so much uncertainty in New York City about what's going to happen over the next couple months. And you have a restaurant project that is going to happen. So what is the next version of Dame will it be called Dame? And what is the timeline for that project? And everything that we've talked about over this entire conversation, has it informed the new version in any ways that you can concretely talk about that are going to change it from what the original version was when you took it out to investors before COVID?
If anything, it's solidified our belief in some of our like core principles. You sort of write those down. For those who haven't written a business plan before, you write those down and like study a business plan, like what your core guiding principles are for your business. And one was to be small and flexible. And I think that has worked really, really well for us. And you've mentioned it, and I think we have too. Like, we managed to do well this summer because we were small and could adapt and change. We're on our third concept in the last 6 months, 6 months at the moment. It's just ridiculous to say out loud, but it's true. And bigger restaurant groups don't have that luxury. We've seen people try and fail at moving their concept to the street or doing to go, and it hasn't worked out so well. So that, I think that part of Dame will always be a guiding light for who we are. What we talked about earlier with the style of cuisine, it's going to revert a little back towards the higher end stuff, but it'll have seafood as its focus now instead of meat, which is exciting for me because it'll be the first time I've dedicated a menu entirely to fish, and there will be very little, if any, meat. The timeline for the opening is hopefully May. I mean, I guess you should say February so that when it's May, it's not so embarrassing. We're lucky. Like we're very, very lucky, actually. We opened a pop-up at a space next to the world's #1 bar. And because they were so busy, we got a lot of their customers, and we had our own following, and then it took off. And then we found a space very, very close, and we knew the community already, and people know that Dame is on McDougall Street, and it's still going to be on McDougall Street, and we may not have the same setbacks that a lot of restaurant openings do. Like sort of throughout this interview, we've spoken about how like tough it can be in various ways. And a lot of that we've managed to skip because we did the pop-up. Like, this was our learning period. This 6 months here that normally that we spent, serving fish and chips from the back of an electric fryer plugged on top of a stove. That's what most people use as their like build out, getting to know their partner, figuring out whether their concept works kind of thing. We know the fish and chips works and people like it. We know we're, very, very good partners. We have very lucky to have a dedicated staff who are both close friends and serious, talented cooks. We know our neighbors and our regulars. There's a lot of the trial and error that goes into a restaurant opening that we've managed to skip over. I don't know if we said this earlier, maybe not. But to your question about advice for people who want to open a restaurant, do a pop-up first. Like, figure out whether it works. If you're gonna raise, I don't really think you can open a restaurant for less than like $150,000 or $200,000 in New York. At least not in Manhattan or Brooklyn. If you're gonna spend that much money, spend $10,000 or $5,000 or $2,000 of it on a 3-month pop-up as your dummy run. We're lucky that we've been able to do that, and now we've been approved for our liquor license, and we're very, very close to signing the lease. And if all goes to plan, we're going to stick to the attitude that we had with this Dame. Put some new tables and chairs in, make it look very pretty, cook delicious food, have very warm service and very tasty wines at an affordable price point, and hopefully be in for the long haul. But that being said, there'll be pandemic #2 next year in 2021. Like, I don't know why. I remember at the end of 2019, everyone thought 2020 was going to be so great. Like, who knows?
A wonderful blend of optimism and doom to close out the interview. Well, I am hoping and wishing that February, May, things are looking up and that you can throw open the doors and welcome everyone into your own brick and mortar location. Patricia and Ed, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me about what the last year and last couple years of your lives in New York and culinary careers have been like.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Where can folks go to learn more about Dame? Is there a website and an Instagram that you can shout out so that people can follow along and get all the information as you get closer to opening?
Yes, Dame New York spelled out.com is our website. And then Dame_NYC is our Instagram. We definitely keep the Instagram more up to date than the website. So go there for all the latest news.
And are you in a full hibernation mode right now until you throw open the doors to the brick and mortar, or is there another sort of pop-up type of deal planned?
We are popping up within our own pop-up and someone else's pop-up at 85 McDougal Street, doing a deli and bottle shop for the winter, because indoor dining, as P said, is not safe, even though it's still technically legal. And I'm sure you've seen outdoor dining structures in New York, and that's just indoor dining on the street. That's not outdoor
correct
dining.
Yeah.
So we're not going to do either of those. But one thing, people still need to eat. So we have a bunch of Natura groceries here. I'm looking at it right now. Natura groceries and pantry stuff. A whole section of wine, some natural, some aged stuff that we picked up at auction. We're going to have Nora from Mel bake bread for us. Our friend and investor Mari is making like tea towels and cute design things. The guys at Fourth Haven, Faccio Bruto, the spirits company, is selling like holiday packets of their spirits. I'm making a bunch of prepared seafood stuff. So I always wished that the tinned seafood conservers you got at delis were better, or at like specialty stores. And so I'm making them ourselves, and you can come pick up like Dame's tinned anchovies or Dame's, pickled mussels, that kind of thing. And we're still doing the fish and chips to go on Friday and Saturdays. So 4 days a week we'll do the bottle shop and the deli, and then we'll be building out next door in the rest of the time. The fish and chips is only going to be Friday and Saturday.
All right, so you're taking it very, very easy over the next couple months, it sounds like, and not really putting too much on your plate at all.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you so much for speaking with me, and everyone go find Patricia and Ed at all these fun, exciting pop-up and brick and mortar concepts that they've got going on McDougal Street. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Line. You can find this episode and over 100 more interviews with chefs, owners, and food entrepreneurs on heritageradionetwork.org, Apple Podcasts, or on Spotify. Please wear a mask and stay safe. The Line is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. For our freshest content, subscribe to our newsletter. Enter your email at the bottom of our website, heritageradionetwork.org. Connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at heritage_radio. You can also find us at facebook.com/Heritage Radio Network. Heritage Radio Network is a nonprofit organization driving conversations to make the world a better, fairer, more delicious place. And we couldn't do it without support from listeners just like you. Want to be a part of the food world's most innovative community? Subscribe to the shows you like, tell your friends, and please join the HRN family by becoming a member. Just click on the beating heart at the top right of our homepage. Thanks for listening.
Hey everybody, I'm Nick Latham.
And I'm Leah Bottima.
And we're the hosts of Were You Raised by Wolves?
Each week we try to make the world a kinder, nicer place.
Well, that's the idea, at least.
I mean, we try.
Have you ever wondered what to do if you're ghosted?
Or what to do when a friend asks you to borrow money?
Or the proper way to eat Cheetos?
You know, the big questions.
So please find Were You Raised by Wolves wherever you listen.